All right, thank you for staying with us. This is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. And to begin our conversation on the rebasing of the economy, let's take this background report put together by Oyeyemi Ajayi.
Nigeria's economy is showing some fresh energy. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the rebased GDP for 2025 reflects a growth of 3.13%, expanding the economy to a whopping 94.5 trillion naira. But what does this mean? Well, the rebasing captures structural changes in the economy and improves in how data is collected. So it gives a clearer, more accurate picture of where things stand. Compared to last year's 2.27% growth during the same period, this is a definite step up. Now, what's driving this growth? It's the services sector leading the charge, growing by 4.33% and contributing a massive 57.5% to the GDP. The non-oil sector also showed a decent 3.19% increase. Trade jumped by 9.13%. Accommodation and food services surged by an impressive 60.33%. Information and communication soared by 31.63%, and agriculture grew by 10.04%. Sounds like a lot of good news, right? But here's the real question. What does all this mean for the everyday Nigerian? How does this growth translate to better living conditions, more jobs, or cheaper prices? These are big questions we'll be asking our guests right now.
Indeed, Oyeyemi Ajayi, thank you for that report. And indeed, these are big questions that our guests will be unpacking this morning as we discuss rebasing the economy. And seated here in the studio this morning is Professor Ken Ife, economic policy expert and President, Institute of Professional Economists and Policy Management. He's a regular on Good Morning Nigeria. It's good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigerians.
Good morning. And also here in the studio is Dr. Aliu Elias, economist, Abuja studio. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
All right, we have also been joined by Farouk Abdullahi, who is a financial analyst. We thank you so very much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, Nigeria.
And joining us from our Kaduna studio is Professor Mariam Abdu, Professor of Finance at the Kaduna State University. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria, madam.
Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Do you mind?
Are we going to start with the lady or...
Well,
let me begin with Professor Ken Ife this morning, and I'm starting with you. What I want you to make us understand, the laymen, and we're laymen here. Yes. I want you to help us understand, what exactly does GDP rebasing mean, and why does it matter for a country like Nigeria?
We'll deal with the GDP and then we'll deal with the rebasing.
Rebasing.
GDP is a measure of the total output of an economy and consumption in an economy, those two. But what happens is that the four pillars of the GDP measurement are household consumption. Now, household consumption tends to come around 75 to 80%, quite heavy. Then the second one is government consumption. Now, government consumption is always between 7, 8, 10%. They're always less than 10%. Then you have two other aspects. One is investment. The investment looks at the private sector who are investing to produce what their output is going to be. But don't forget that when you produce, some are exported, some also are imported. When you consume some imported and exported. So that gives rise to a balance of payment. Because that balance of payment nets off what is going out and what is coming in. And it's, luckily for Nigeria, during the time of, during time of subsidy, it was negative. But with the subsidy removed, it jumped to positive. It's about $6.8 billion. So that was good for our GDP. So those are the four items. Now, because you are measuring consumption and production and all of that, technology and innovation affect the patterns of consumption.
How?
Pattern means, what you consume, how it is described. They change over time like technology. Now, you're no longer talking about ICT. You're talking about EdTech, FinTech, Envirotech, health tech. So there are things emerging. So all this means that classifications will have to be changing to meet those changes in patterns of consumption. And what they use is International Standard Industry Classification, ISIC. Now, those classifications change over time. That's why rebasing is necessary. Now, rebasing every 5 years, you're supposed to look at those again, see which of your things escape that new classification, and you bring them in. Because in your figure down, you will show you how accommodation services jump to have, no, because of the classification. And that happened also during the inflation reclassification. So they found out that certain things like pension funds were not being captured in all these classifications. Then you also have the National Social Security Insurance Fund. Pension is over 20 trillion. It's quite significant. Yeah. Then in the area of transportation, you also saw a huge increase in transportation. It's because we are not actually capturing. In the transportation, you should be capturing NPA, the Post Authority, the NEMASA, the Council, National Shipping Council, all of those. The Inland Waterway, NIWA, Inland Waterway Service. These are very significant. And then you could see that now they are captured, the figures jumped significantly. Then there are other things like domestic employers of labor, your cook, your steward, your cleaner. All those things were not actually picked. Much more informal, but nevertheless, there are still some form of employment. So picking all those in the context of the news classification was what brought us there. Then when you're supposed to be doing this every 5 years, but the last time it was done was in 2014, and the base year used was 2010. And when that was done, we came in at about 59% increase. It doesn't always have to be an increase when you rebase. In some cases, it becomes a decrease. Okay. But it was an increase. And Ghana was about 60% at the same time. Now, this time round, we now have an increase in that base. The reference year used was 2019. Why did we use 2019? Because that was the year that was not scuttled by the normal year before COVID came, because COVID changed everything. So you don't want to use COVID. Yeah. So you use 2019 just before COVID, and it showed an increase of about 41%. So you now take it from there. And then when you now started looking at the GDP figures after that rebasing at 2019, you saw a sharp drop of minus 6.9%. That was because of COVID recession. Then you came back on recession at 0.9. Then it now started increasing, gradually. So 2%, 3%, now up till 2024. So that is essentially what it is all about.
All right. Thank you very much for laying that groundwork, Professor Ken Ife. Now let me get to Professor Mariam Abdu in Kaduna before we come back to our studio guests. Now Professor Abdu, I'm just wondering how this rebased GDP impacts Nigeria's fiscal planning. And we're talking about budgets, deficit projections, and even revenue assumption, for instance.
Yes, you see there are some takeaways from this rebasing that just occurred. In terms of budgeting, we now know that the economy is doing very well. The Nigerian economy is growing. We find that there are some sectors that are doing well and some that are not going too well. The services sector has been doing remarkably well. The non-oil sector is equally growing. So it gives us really a very good picture when it comes to budgeting and financial analysis. Now, if you look at some macroeconomic indicators, overall the GDP, we have a debt ratio of GDP debt of 40%. I want to see a situation where our GDP debt ratio is actually lower so that we can have a faster economic growth in activities. Agricultural sector is doing very well. And previously in the report, we understand that there were some sectors that were not captured, which was the business development sector and the agricultural sector. Now, these sectors have actually recorded progress. So really, when we're looking at budgeting, I think it gives us an idea of how well or how poorly a particular sector is performing. If you look at the manufacturing sector, the transport sector, education sector, they have not recorded good results compared to the real estate sector, administration services, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Much, Professor Mariam, there for your opening comment. Let's now return to the studio where Farouk Abdullahi, a financial analyst, is seated. Farouk Abdullahi, now that the GDP has jumped significantly, does this sort of reflect real economic growth, or is this simply a statistical adjustment here?
I would say yes, it's a statistical adjustment. It depicts in numerical terms the changes that we're having over time due to the recalibration of our GDP based on the base year of 2019. So basically, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to translate into, households, better livelihoods and all of that. There are two different things. It takes a lot of things to do that. There has to be, strategic policy adjustment, and realignment, to address, the current needs, of Nigerians. So as you can see, other macroeconomic indicators are not being touched upon by these changes that we are having, like inflation, our exchange rates, our per capita income is not being touched upon. Today, our capita income is around $1,000 per Nigerian compared to South Africa. They are doing about 5,700 or thereabout. So you can see that it is not, improving the livelihood of Nigerians. But by virtue of having a numerical data that would guide in policy formulation and implementation, I think it is good. We have a clearer and a more realistic, overview of how our economy is being structured based on, I think, the emerging, economic sectors that have been captured, in the GDP estimations. So by virtue of that, I would say that, yes, there is improvement in some of the macroeconomic indicators like the debt to GDP ratio, which is now below 40%, and 40% is usually the threshold for Nigeria. So this means that it would instill more investor confidence, and it would give, the government more appetite to borrow more funds for other infrastructural need and perhaps for financing the budget. So that is basically, a reflection of what the recalibration exercise is all about. So it's not a reflection of, it's not going to automatically translate into enhancing, the livelihood of Nigerians. If we look at the poverty index, you'd see that, by this recalibration of the GDP, it's not going to enhance it. Inflationary figures is not going to, reduce the cost of prices of goods and services. So these are things that are a reflection of the real economy, aside the statistical, estimation that was done, just to give a clarity, a depiction of the performance of our economy in terms of measuring the outputs of it. And one thing is to look at the overwhelming increase in the output, and another thing is also to complement it with the input. What is the income that is coming into the country? Is it complementing the output? So if there is no balance within these two things, then it simply tells us that there lies a problem in terms of, the likely fallback that we are going to have in the economy. Because as we stand now, I think, resources is not evenly distributed in Nigeria. If you look at, the allocation of resources, it's not balanced, no matter how much income we have. For instance, in these estimations, services have the highest chunk, of the figures that is being captured, in the recalibration of our GDP. And by that doing, that simply tells us that services naturally do not have a direct impact on our economy. these sectors do not directly, impact, on our, level of employment. It does not directly impact on our cost of goods and services. Rather, it cuts it down, because these services revolve around, technology, ICT, and other performing sectors. And if you look at also the oil and gas sector, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to improve the employment levels and whatnot. So these are metrics that are not having a direct impact on the livelihoods of Nigerians. So it takes strategic, policy, amendment, and development and implementation before we could gradually start seeing the needed impact or the needed change amongst Nigerians.
All right. Thank you very much, Farouk Abdullahi. Let me take off from where you stopped and get to Ali Ilyas. I'm wondering again, what are the practical benefits of rebasing the GDP, for instance? We're talking about for sectors like ICT, trade, and agriculture.
Right. So thank you so much. I think basically it has... it's quite expository, both to the government, investors, and even household. So how does it actually work? If you look at it from the international perspective, that is foreign direct investment, it actually shows the standard, the good representation of Nigeria economy. This exposes them to where we are, and also business opportunity gap for them. Because if you look at the per capita income, that is looking at GDP divided by, peoples in Nigeria, you discover, like you rightly said, it's like $1,000, dollars. If you look at that, you now know that there's an investment opportunity, because it's also ranked Nigeria at its actual status, right? That is, if you are looking at Nigeria from investment perspective, you now say, okay, this is where Nigeria actually are based. And, even in looking at that, sometimes we also see that most times it's not even good representation, because if you look at Nigerian population, right, and the purchasing power of Nigeria, you agree with me that it might not be reflecting our real capacity. Because if you look at the dollar value, right, by the time you deflate, that's when we have such. So it does not still mean that Nigeria does not have that capacity of purchasing power compared to other countries. And when you also look at it from government perspective, it also gives policy direction. Simply that the government will know that this sector is not doing well, so we need to do more. Or for instance, if you look at it from trade, right, you have to look at balance of trade and balance of payment. What do you do more in terms to attract much more investment? Also, if you also look at it from financial sector perspective, you discover that in financial sector, it does not really bring the employment. So what do we have to do? That means we have to look at agriculture the more. Agriculture will give much more employment, right? If you look at construction, it will give more employment. So it exposes us and Nigerian policymakers to where investment can actually come from and where we can do better in our economy. And generally, when we talk about GDP, it exposes the output. It also exposes where Nigeria needs to do more to actually increase the output. What is our comparative advantages? What can we do more to actually enhance it? More so, if you look at Africa generally now, perhaps we are number 5. So that number 5 also have its own meaning, because we need to do more to actually increase our output, as it were. So it's overall exposition of our standard in terms of global level, in terms of GDP, as it were.
Okay, thank you so much, Ali. Yes, don't forget, you can send in your text messages as you join this conversation. We'd like to hear your opinions, and maybe you'll begin to understand.
Keep it short
and
simple.
Names. Yes, please. And okay, now, Professor Ken, let's talk policy. With a larger GDP, our debt to GDP ratio appears lower. So, could this affect how Nigeria borrows or manages its public finances?
It does. Although the actual fiscal law that sits on top of all of this is called Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. It prescribes a deficit, budget deficit to GDP shouldn't be more than 3, if I move to 4%. We will be violating that when we consume this $21.5 billion that is coming in, 15 billion yen, and 2.19 billion euro. When all that one hit the ground, that rate will be completely violated. And in fact, even the normal guidance on debt to GDP ratio is actually 40%. The World Bank keeps saying that the economy of the type of Nigeria, you can actually risk 50% or so. But those will be breached when these new ones hit the ground. They will breach all those wide levels. Although in 2007, when the law came in, they didn't put in, only one that they allowed was the fiscal deficit. And they say that in the next 6 months after the adoption of the law, the Minister of Finance should advise the President in consultation with the National Assembly on all other ratios. That is federal government debt to GDP ratio, state government, local governments, they should know all the ratios. And then even revenue to GDP ratio. All these ratios needed to be stipulated there, but they didn't. And even the domestication, I looked at so many laws, fiscal laws all over the world, 90% of them within 1 year forces all levels of government to enter into it. Nigeria said, leave it, let it become when only 25 states have till now domesticated. So it's just the way Nigeria behaves. But back to your question, whether it has impact or so, it does have impact. The borrowing, I'm not going to be reflecting on the borrowing now because we will have time. Because, you know, government needs to borrow money to do things that will leverage economic growth. But the law there is very, very strict on what you can borrow money from. It says you can only borrow for capital expenditure and human resource development. And we know human resource development to be health, education, enterprise, and employment. It doesn't allow any other thing under that law. You can get your IGR, you can get grants from World Bank, you can share all those, do anything you want to do. And then it tells you that in capital expenditure, you need to also do cost-benefit analysis. That means that the law was anticipating that when you are going to do infrastructure or in productive capacity investment, you must look at corridors, economic corridors, industrial corridors, residential corridors, commercial corridors, so that if the infrastructure touches them, whether it's power or road, the capacity to replace them, maintain them will be there and actually pay back. But those things are not coming through. Because if you don't do the cost-benefit analysis, then you're lacking the transparency to ensure that we can interrogate your borrowing. So that's it's a story for another day.
It's a story for another day.
Well, let me get back to Professor Mariam Abdul, who is in Kaduna, in our Kaduna studio. Now, can you explain to us, for instance, how this new data, helps or, complicates debt management and public sector borrowing for Nigeria?
You see, before the rebasing, there was the reason for the rebasing really is because there were some certain sectors that were not included. And when we rebase, it gives us a holistic picture. It captures items that were not included. It gives us an updated figure. It gives us a true situation of our economic performance in terms of GDP. So rebasing really will help the monetary authorities, the fiscal authorities, in the direction of, so that they can have an idea of where we are and what is actually happening in the Nigerian economy. So truly, I am really satisfied and happy with the growth, despite the circumstances or the elements that was just discussed earlier regarding our poverty index and all that. But at least we're seeing that the manufacturing or the gross domestic product is actually increasing. It's a plus on our head. We're growing. We want the GDP to continue growing. We want to see. I personally want to see less of borrowing because I don't want us to go into the poverty trap. The debt ratio of 40, getting to 40 is quite high. I think we should really look at external borrowing and concentrate more on internal productivity. I'm happy that the non-oil sector is doing so well. That means we're having a shift from relying on the oil sector to the non-oil sector. Agriculture has performed remarkably well. Services has performed remarkably well. So I think slowly we're on the right track.
I will still stay with you. And can you tell us how this will affect, investor confidence and Nigeria's economy, economic standing within Africa and globally? Let's have your opinion, because Ali said that, Farouk said that it will instill investor confidence. Do you agree? What's your opinion there?
Yes, I certainly agree. There will be, once we have a stable gross domestic output, investors will have the confidence of investing in Nigeria. But then we have to look at even the foreign exchange policy, our situation. The foreign exchange has not been very favorable to the Nigerian economy. It's making imports expensive. And as we have security now, so when we're looking at investments, I think it will encourage investments into the Nigerian economy, definitely.
So, Farouk, how might the new GDP figure now affect Nigeria's debt sustainability and ratios and investor risk perception?
Well, I think it will affect it in a positive way, as I've stated earlier, because what investors look at, in terms of, the debt threshold of any economy is whether it is within, the right threshold that is being established for the country or not. And at the same time, the trajectory at which the economy is going, it is growing. It is growing, putting into consideration, other emerging sectors of the economy that has been captured, in the recalibrated GDP in the country. So I fervently believe that investors would have more confidence to invest in Nigeria, not only foreign investment, but also local investment also will be spurred, because we have seen that the informal sector have been captured, and government has seen that there is a need, to focus on these emerging sectors that are coming up, through policy reforms and whatnot. And this would see through to the rapid and astronomical, development and growth in those areas. Just look at the oil and gas sector that is leaping, We have seen a lot of improvement from both the public and private sector. The government is coming up with reforms in terms of the oil and gas sector. We are more of, I think, a gas economy than an oil economy. And I've seen how the government is investing in pipelines, infrastructure, how the government is even investing in the recent compressed natural gas initiatives and whatnot. So this would add up to, the overall investment, improvement in the country, both local and foreign. So I fervently believe that it is a right step in the right direction. But however, recall in one of the speeches by the president where he anticipates Nigeria to become a 1 billion economy by 2030. And today, Nigeria's economy is growing by virtue of these metrics. Nigeria's economy is growing slightly above 3% today. And for us to achieve that, I think our economy needs to grow at about 15% for us to achieve that objective.
Is there a chance that it could jump from 3%, for instance, that we add to maybe 10 and maybe, upwards like that?
Yes, that is why I say this statistical depiction serves as a guide, for the government to make strategic reforms that would have direct impact on our economy and that would grow these emerging economies, these emerging sectors, and that would perhaps also have direct impact on our livelihood, and that would also certainly unleash other sectors within the economy that could add up to the overall growth. We have seen how art and culture is being captured for the first time. We have seen how, the digital economy is also soaring high. Real estate, it's expected for real estate to go high, especially in periods of real estate booms. But in periods of where there is a plunge in the value of real estate, it drastically go down. So I think the real economy needs to be reinvigorated. It needs to be enhanced through, strategic policy reforms. And I think that is a watchword that would guide towards, making good use of this statistical data that we are having. We need to translate statistical data, into real economic reality, which would ultimately be translated into better livelihood for ordinary Nigerians.
Indeed, translate into strategic policy reforms. Dr. Aliu, can you walk us through from how it will translate to development? Like, what can government do to ensure these opportunities reflected in the rebased GDP to translate into jobs, investment, and also infrastructure?
Right, and that is the beauty of such statistical data. It will let government know that there is a particular area we need to do more. And most especially, now that informal sector have been captured, the government will now say that those areas need to be seriously looked into properly. As we know that most foreign direct investment are mostly portfolio in nature. They don't really translate to employment to Nigerians, because you can't compare that to other trade, crop production, real estate. This actually bring about much more. So what I think government needs to do more is to look at the policy itself now. So when we are bringing about policy, and with the ongoing reform that is actually going on, I think it's a good optics for the economy. Because if you look at it now, I'm foreseeing that by December, January, February, Nigeria economy will be much more boom compared to now, because of most of those reforms will be actually be reflecting then, especially when you look at the tax reform as well. That would have empowered other sector as well, because during that period we say maybe health and other things will not be, the tax on them would have reduced, and so there will be more purchasing power for Nigerian citizens. So there is likely going to be, so with this GDP report now, it will now help the policy direction. Even the private sector also, they are also looking at investment gap, so that, as a private sector, you have to look at it, okay, where is the money? Where can I actually focus to invest? So this also gives them a direction that, okay, now that real estate is captured, crop production, trade, and even mining especially, if you look at quarrying, mining, we've not actually see them coming up in terms of consideration as a metric to actually look at our GDP. So now that they are coming up, it's an opportunity both for a policymaker, investors, even a business person. So these are the benefits during for Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Aliu. Professor Kenife, with an eye on attaining that $1 billion economy, $1 trillion rather economy in 2030, and with the services sector now dominating, what priorities, what policy priorities must shift to support this evolving economic pattern?
I will come to that, but I want to disabuse people's minds about what GDP can do and what it cannot do. GDP is a number. It doesn't put food on your table. It doesn't pay your bills. It's just a number. And as an imaginary fairy tale. Let me explain. Who pays your bill is the debt service to revenue. Now, if your debt service to revenue is about 80% and all that, it doesn't matter what the GDP tells you, you have to pay that debt that month. And then you don't have enough revenue to pay the debt. What do? You jump to go and borrow more money. The second thing is that it doesn't tell you the gravity of the fact that when the first quarter of this year GDP was looked at, our agricultural growth was 0.07, complete melt. You might as well call it zero. It was complete meltdown. Now, when you are saying how does it affect poor man in the street, that is how it affects poor man in the street, because you're not producing enough money, no need food to feed people. Population growth rate is 2.8 to 3%. Urbanization, which is shift of young people to urban area, is 4.6%. And the food to give them is 0.07%. That is crisis. And that links to the widening poverty gap. That is the link. It tells you that. So I don't want to sound negative, but it is just a potential. The reality is somewhere else. Then coming to the $1 trillion economy. First of all, there are two things to look at, and they are, you mentioned deflator. The size of your economy, the actual size of your economy, forget the politics of exchange rate and all of that. The real size of the economy shows that Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa. Our GDP purchasing power parity, that is what tells you the exact size of what you produce and what is consumed, is $1.28 trillion. It's a $1 trillion economy. But what happens is that when you come to semantics and how the world wants to look at this, they want to use a comparator to be sure that we're all on the same level in terms of when dollar comes into the picture. They will deflate that GDP, which is $376 trillion. They will divide it by 1,530 naira to $1. Then you are beginning to see $274 billion. In 2014, in December 2014, our GDP was $573 billion. We were only a small short to 600 billion 2020 vision 2020. But what happened? Shortly after that, oil price went down, the thing collapsed to 300. So what happens is the effect is that the thing is going up and down depending on the value of your currency. Yeah? Now, let me tell you something. It's $274 today, okay? The exchange rate is 1,530. Supposing you use the exchange rate of 500, which was what happened when this administration was sworn in, use it as a deflator, this figure becomes $720 billion. So all you need to hit your $1 trillion is just go about a 7-8% growth. But as it stands now, to use 274 billion to go to 1,000, you said 15%. It needs more than 15%. If you go and do the cumulative, because it's still going to be swinging up and down, you won't get there. It will be about 20%, which is unimaginable.
In other
but what
words,
I'm saying,
it's not achievable?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you cannot exclude the effect of currency on the movement of GDP in dollars. Ghana, just by capturing their gold and saying, enough of this, let's have our gold, let's accrete to the foreign reserve. Nigeria did that during last Mohammed administration. We spent about 500 billion trying to buy some of the gold in Zamfara so that they can head to our foreign reserve. If you have a lot of gold and other sensitive metal in your reserve, you have more stability in your foreign exchange. And that's what Russia is doing. That's what all the BRICS countries walking away from dollar. That's what they're doing. The price of gold, look at the price of gold today. It is somewhere you can't reach. But the thing, that is something that government has to look at. You're asking me some of the things that government needs. We get less than $3 billion a year from gold in Zamfara and KB and all that stuff. And it's not just that. You get a boulder of rock. There's a lot of lithium there. There's a lot of gold. There's a lot of platinum. But you don't even know what is what. You can't tax. You don't know what is your tax. So let's do this. We're already about to pass a law that says don't move any mineral resources or solid of gold or food, anything, unless you have minimum of 30% value addition. Because then you are capturing the value. At least you start capturing 3 times more value from your export. And then make sure that those sensitive metals go and join our reserves. Ghana just did that, and Ghana CDs has increased in value by 50%. Within a few months of this man being in there. So there are things that can be done. And then the revelation on food is absolute disaster. Honestly, so I'm telling you this is disaster.
So how can Nigeria sort of avoid the pitfall?
Well, the pitfall, well, see, the policy, all that thing, it gives you the whole idea of where your potentials lie in the economy. But you now have to sit back to say, well, why are we not attracting investment into this economy, into these areas? Then, and make them know that there's a difference between foreign portfolio investment, which call it hot money. They just come because somebody borrows money at 4% abroad somewhere or 3%, and they see that Nigeria is selling treasury bills at 20% and on some bills. They can see arbitrage. But they can only come if you can assure them that you will keep the exchange rate steady for them to jump in, take their money out, and sell it. The moment you start allowing that, they will vanish, their money will go. So when Trump started messing up, they all started running away, fearing that this thing will collapse. But when it didn't collapse, they are still back again. And they've gone up for more than 8%. But the one that is critical to the question you're asking is foreign direct investment and domestic investment. They don't talk about domestic investment because nobody has captured $20 billion Dangote put in the refinery. They don't regard that. They think, oh, the one that come from abroad, that's more than 10%, all that's shenanigans. That's what they call foreign direct investment. But it's not coming, and it's not going to come back soon because they are watching the market condition of your economy. They are looking at the structural factors. They are looking at insecurity. They are looking at the high cost of energy. They are looking at that. That's why what Dangote is trying to do is so important, to rule out 4,000 trucks and bring down those middlemen that are making sure that the poor man can't breathe, can't get fuel, so all those stuff. So that is where policy needs to go to, so that you can have traction.
All right, Professor Kenife, thank you very much. Let me, from one prof to another prof, let me get to Professor Mariam Abdu in Kaduna. After all of this, it's a lot of grammar usually when you talk economics, and it's a lot of grammar. And I'm wondering, for the ordinary people, let's take, for instance, women and the rural population in this economy. To what extent is this rebasing a reality for them?
Well, you see, if you look at rural women or women per se, they have the problem of access to finance. There's a finance deficit in that area because we're looking at development of women, and if we're going to address poverty, we have to look at issues of women. Now, those in the rural areas, the government needs to encourage more of activities for women, really. Let's start financing their business activities. They don't have access to loans because of certain issues, affecting them personally. They don't have collateral to access loans to pursue the entrepreneurs. Really, it is growing. It's a very key part in economic development, in poverty eradication, So we want to see more programs tailored towards encouraging women entrepreneurship and financing activities in rural areas.
Talking about women entrepreneurship, Farouk, do you think that sort of the rebasing creates a more accurate picture of Nigeria's productivity and business potential for now?
Yes, I absolutely believe so, because it has captured, a whole lot of new areas that hasn't been looked at before. Although the whole idea of this rebasing, it's more like a cosmetic depiction of our economy, just in tandem with what Prof has, stated. So it doesn't give, in real terms, the state of our economy, but it gives an idea on, how the economy looks like for us to make an informed decision, strategic decisions on what to do, to bring about, the desired outcome. So frankly speaking, I still would reiterate that at the heart of this development lies the need, for strategic reforms in a way that it would touch upon the lives and livelihoods of Nigerians. It is very important, we look at that. We have, Prof has touched upon some areas of the economy that can, be looked at, reforms can be made. In addition, also, we have to look at the power sector. What is the power sector like? Look at all the developing, or rather the developed economies. What is their power sector like? What is the power consumption attributed to each Nigerian today? I think it's around 180 kilowatts today, compared with other countries that does in thousands, even within our African, contemporary countries. So it is important we look at those areas and see how we could, potentially make impact in those regards. Also, areas also that touches upon the real economy is important. Areas that gives jobs, employment, areas that people get incomes into their households is really important. The government needs to look at that and see how it can be impactful. And also, the uneven distribution of resources is also important. Earlier, I mentioned that the income per head in Nigeria is around $1,000, but this $1,000 does not cut across the entire population in Nigeria. How many people are getting access to that $1,000 in real terms? That's why I say it's just a statistical, depiction. If you look at it, a major chunk of the income goes, to the minority part of the population, while the overwhelming number are living, in abject poverty, in serious hardships, and all of that. So it takes for strategic reforms by the government to see that such kind of, economic benefit or impact cut across, ordinary Nigerians. If we anticipate, for instance, the CNG initiative to work very well across the entire country, this will ameliorate the cost of transportation. This will bring about succor to Nigerians. Even goods and services. We have seen Dangote now that have taken the front stage in bringing in 4,000 CNG trucks, and I believe he's going to bring more. So by so doing, he said he's going to distribute fuel across the country at zero transportation cost. So what would happen if the government comes up with policy that would say, okay, farmers now moving goods from the farmlands to the communities, utilizing CNG trucks, that will cut down, it will slash down, the transportation cost, moving also goods from strategic part of the countries, from one location to another with such kind of CNG trucks would also equally cut down transportation cost. We have seen the train lines that are going on. Some of them are utilizing CNG, and it's even cheaper to travel from Abuja to Kaduna on train than using the public transport, than using the normal, buses or cars that utilizes petrol or diesel. Is far cheaper. So if this can be extended to other part of the countries, these are policies that would, have direct impact on Nigerians, build more real infrastructures that would address transportation issue, enhance and improve and unbundle, the power sector in a way that there will be power independence. People also, and I've seen strategic moves, by the government, but they need to do more in trying to promote this renewable energy of a thing where power can be generated in a more, efficient way, and that would have more impact and at less cost for ordinary Nigerians. So there are a lot of things that, if you sum them up, would have a meaningful impact on the ordinary Nigerian. That is why I'm happy with the recent recalibration of the GDP. It gives us more confidence and it gives us more, idea on where to put in our, X, So it's a good one, but it takes also a collective effort from both the public, the private sector, and all well-meaning Nigerians to see how we can register our impact at both personal levels and also at the public levels. So it's really important we do that.
Thank you, Farouk. And Aliu, with the services sector, of course, dominating at 57.5%, how do we ensure that other sectors like manufacturing, agriculture, don't end up getting sidelined?
Right. So I think that's where we need to work, and that's why the government, not even at the federal level, even the other government of the state government need to do more. Like I said earlier, that the service sector cannot give us the employment we are actually looking at. It cannot give us the production, the output we are actually looking at, because we need to look at the manufacturing sector, the MSME, empowering them. And in line with what Farouk actually said, a major problem in Nigeria is supply chain problem. I would say supply chain problem. Movement of items from one place to the other. I could buy onion at 5,000 naira in Kebbi. But bringing the onion down to Abuja, it will cost more than the amount actually purchased the onion in Kebbi. And that will translate the transport costs, another sundry costs, into what I would sell outside. And that brings about why food and other things are getting expensive. If you also look at our inflation, the major thing that is pushing it forward is food inflation. So until we work on that supply chain to actually make sure that things become much more easier. He was making mention. He made mention of CNG. I actually converted my car some 9 months ago, with the hope that yes, it will reduce my cost of actually for energy. But lo and behold, yes, government is trying to build more, but I've abandoned it for the past 4 months.
Because you can't get...
Because I have to trade off at least 4 to 5 hours to actually get the gas. You can go around and check. So, and that actually affects the supply chain. So the cost of energy, when we say energy, we are looking at CNG, electricity, all these have to work on until we reduce that cost. Go and check the global economy. They are performing well. The secret is that they make sure that the cost of supply chain reduce very well, so that it will help manufacturing and other MSME to do business. If as a private practice person, I have to pay more, for band A, as it were. In fact, if there is no electricity, I have to also look at way of getting fuel to actually power my what have you. Then in transport, I have to look at. So until we look at this, I'm sure that it's come down to barest minimum level.
I'm surprised you didn't mention solar, alternative energy sources.
It doesn't come cheap. For you to power a house, you might need 5,000. What do we call it? 5,000. What do we call it? Kilowatts. Understand? And to do that with the panel, with the inverter, you might be looking at 3.7 million, and you are expecting an MSME person to embark on that
kind of project.
So, and that's the problem. Remember, our energy, especially electricity, is still single source now. If I don't use a particular one that is in Abuja, is there anyone I can switch to? So until we have that competition and that alternative, so if we can work on our supply chain, it will help our economy very, and that still takes us back to CBN. Now, if you look at the NPR, I think it's 27.5%. Though we agree that maybe with the state of the economy now, they may not want to bring it down. They want to tarry a bit to see how things will turn out. But that's also what is affecting. As a businessman, I don't want to go to bank to borrow and pay 30%, interest. So I will be looking, how will I make profit? So let me rather go and keep that money in bank and also collect interest. Because a business person is expected to be a rational person who will consider his profit and what have you. And that's why it also trickled down to employment. According to the methodology used by NBS, they said we have 4% unemployment rate. I think the method is maybe 1 hour per week compared to 20 hours that we used before. But you know that as a manufacturing company, if I do not have more money, to invest in a manufacturing, endeavor, I would not employ more. And that would have affected, and in the long run, it also affects the GDP itself. So that's why all this needs to be, it's holistic. Government needs to, work on all this so that we can actually, business can actually flow. Even the foreign direct investment, we also consider security, the inflation, the GDP, every other, metrics to come to the economy. So for me, I think we should do more, especially on that supply chain. That's why China is where they are. China have about 2 free trade zones in Nigeria. What are they trying to do? They're trying to make business much more easier for their people. So when you're doing business as a Chinese citizen, they make sure that everything that will make you to do all that cost, they make sure that it's come easy, and that's what we need to do more. And coming to Dangote, who actually embarked on getting a 4,000, I think it's a very you can see the supply chain strategy. No, don't let me create all this problem for myself. Let me make it easier for the buyer to actually buy from me. But you also can look at other multimodal mode of transportation to actually achieve that. It should not be only truck, because our road also is suffering.
It's suffering. Indeed, we need to look at infrastructural development. Yeah? Well, we'll take a break. When we return, the conversation continues. Don't go away.
All right, thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria, where we've been discussing the implications and what it means for the economy, the rebasing of the economy, of the GDP recently. But we've got some messages coming in, and we'll take this first one from Edward here in Abuja, who asks, is a weakened Naira a good thing? I ask because the Naira is one of the weakest currencies in Africa. So what are the implications of this? Okay. And from Arabi Kende Paul, Life Camp Abuja, rebasing allows the economy to be seen clearly. Now, this enables effective planning, policy implementation, and ultimately sustainable economy. However, while rebasing can lead to a higher nominal GDP, it may not translate to improved living standards or a reduction in inequality. Now, this is the point, and I think the government should critically look at the other end of the line and come up with policies that will reduce inherent poverty in the country by tackling the insecurity and infrastructure challenges that stifle growth. Long one. And from Hudson Ogan, hello, how does government borrowing affect the GDP of a country? Okay, that's for the Economists. And good morning, Nigeria, from Alhaji Lawal Danladi Abdul Malik. Please, if I may ask, why are our gold mines not government managed? And finally, from Okoro, or is it Okro? Please help us bring our okra to the market. Okay? The cost is now too much because these uniformed men ask for so much money. This affects the price we end up selling. Okay.
Yes, and
perhaps we should get some responses before we get to yours.
Not even sure which of them, where to start.
Just start anywhere.
Just take the one you can and then.
Yeah. I think those questions are actually very soul-searching, to be honest. We've talked on this program how GDP does not explain why poverty is dipping further down. And we try to link it to the bad news about growth of agriculture, which is 0.07%. So clearly, there's a mismatch there, and we need to address those. And also, it's been clear that transport is everything. You know, the period of rail. The last real investment in rail was in 1927. And rail is what connects everywhere in this country. And you remember, all those rail hubs turned out to become capitals of cities. So it tells you what transportation can also do to development. And in terms of, I wanted to, what was the last one now? The last one was very, very important.
What was talking about the weak Naira.
Yeah. The thing about Naira is the valuation of, why did Naira have to lose value? It has to lose value because Naira is, exchange rate is price. Inflation is price. Monetary policy rate is price. And in any price mechanism, demand and supply comes into play. So it is, and you're talking about a free market economy. This is what we have. For you to be free, competition has to be there, and then there has to be resolution of price, demand and supply to give you the price. So the Naira had to float to try to find this level, but not float 100% because nobody does that. So it has to be managed float. So you allow it to float as much as possible to bring in as much dollar as you can from all potential sources, and then try and cut down as much waste from import as possible to give it a fair shot. And CBN has done a great job there. But in real fact, if you are devaluing, there always has to be a reason for devaluing apart from trying to resolve the demand and supply. That reason is that when countries are overproducing and they want to hit the market, they reduce their exchange rate so that they can flood external markets. But we have not used this advantage. For 2 years, we've had a low Naira value and we're not exporting. This is the golden opportunity for us to sell anything and everything. One example, I'm from ECOWAS Commission. We go around, I go to all the Francophone countries. 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 1 Naira buys 3 francs CFA. Yes. Today, 1 Naira can only buy me 0.7. So what does it mean in fact? When I now go to Benin, Republic of Benin, I went last week, and Cotonou 3 weeks ago, I can't stay. I was scared of going in the hotel because they are charging me 3 times what I would have been paying. So just explain, please. So 1,000. Okay, my hotel room in Nigeria, how much would that be? Let's say an average of 60,000. But that 60,000 is like 20,000 franc. But when I go, I see franc, their hotel at 100,000, 200, it's 3 times more expensive. You're asking me to pay 300,000 naira per room.
For a night?
For a night. So it's scary. It's because our money has collapsed. Then Apple. How much do you buy Apple? 1,000 naira each. But then I have a bunch of 5 apples, which could have been 5,000 naira or 2,000, and they're asking me for 7,000 in their SEFA, which is 7 times 3, 21,000. So you can imagine me buying 5 apples, 21,000. So that is the impact of the devaluation. But Nigeria would have been smiling if only we have ramped up non-oil exports and start throwing anything, because anything that you send out, you're actually getting 3 times its value because you are exporting it. In the other way, if you go over there, you pay 3 times the value because you are comparing their money against a weak currency.
So it's not about willpower, actually.
And then was asking, I don't know who could respond to why the gold mines are not in the hands of government.
I have plenty ones here now. Let me quickly go to Thomas Babatunde. He said debt to GDP ratio improved since the GDP grew. The ratio of national debt to GDP fell, making Nigeria look more financially stable. Better policy planning, policymakers could now base decisions on more accurate data, which improved budget planning and development strategies. Mewan said, good morning, Nigeria. Distinguished guests, from the data, it's clear that the service sector outperforms the real sector. However, the basic economic logic required the service sector to serve the real sector, but the reverse is the case in Nigeria. Is the acclaimed growth in GDP not inflationary? Olawole Ayola from University of Ibadan. And Alade from Lagos said, here's the big thing. Our economy has potential, yes, but it's facing real challenges too. Inflation is high, especially food prices. The naira keeps losing value. Unemployment is affecting young people a lot. Olawale. And here's the thing, Alade, I've read Alade's own. And then another one said, growth is necessary but not sufficient condition for development. My question is that how can this growth recorded translate to development, or how can this growth trickle down to the poor? Another question is, what are the measures to employ in order to ensure that this growth is sustained? Professor Mariam, can you respond to some of these text messages?
Yes, well, the issue of growth, like we said earlier, this press bulletin by the Statistician General is an eye-opener for the government to see areas that can be improved. If you look at the sectors of industry, services, and agriculture, you find that the manufacturing sector didn't do quite well. Now, it's an indication that something has to be done with the manufacturing industry. So we want to see a situation where government policy is directed at improving manufacturing or industrial development, because as an economy, when we're looking at poverty, the issue of industry, the issue of employment, the issue of inflation, health, education, all these factors come to play. For now, we are seeing a reduction in food prices, which is encouraging for the economy, for the nation. But the government needs to do more on industry so that we can have employment generation. Without employment, without education, without health, definitely we're going to run into waters. So I listened to all the comments from that came in, and actually what they're saying is actually the true picture of what is happening in Nigeria. But we want to see more industrial development. We want to see a favorable exchange rate. We want to see reduction in inflation. If you look at our inflationary exchange rate, double digits, which is not encouraging. If you look at advanced countries, they have single digits. So we want to see more of that coming to Nigeria. We want to see less of debt. Personally, that's my view. I don't want to see a situation where we keep on borrowing, because servicing those loans is a problem for Nigeria. And with the current exchange rate that we're facing, it becomes almost impossible. So I think the government should keenly look into these issues and see how we can actually, improve on the current situation. But so far, so good. Just like you said, the GDP are just figures, but at least the figures are positive. So that would actually give us even a positive situation in how we can address some of these problems.
Thank you very much. We still had some comments. Someone was asking, for instance, Farouk, why our gold mines are not in the hands of government. Why is government not operating our gold mines? Another was talking about how they get extorted before the okra gets to the market and why okra becomes expensive. Perhaps you want to respond?
Right. On the issue of
Go ahead.
okra and the police, that's part of supply chain problem that I mentioned earlier. Because security, we have a lot of bureaucratic bottleneck. Just like when you go to port authority, you see port head, which you call environmental health officer. You see SON, you see NAVDAC, you see police, you see custom. But this can be a one-stop shop. If it's a one-stop shop, that simply means you are not paying at that different.
Is it no longer? Is it not now the case with the new tax law?
Well, but they said they still exist, but the NRS, the Nigeria Revenue Service, only collect the revenue. So maybe the process is going to be harmonized now, whereby you pay at once. Perhaps you only show your evidence of payment at every point. We hope that will be
sufficient. That is, if there's evidence.
Yes, that would be a true, presentation of it. Then in terms of gold and what have you, I think we have reform in that area. The minister is Alake, who is working on our mine. I think what we need to do is to do more reform. But the challenge now is that every investor is looking at comparative advantage. If you are processing gold in Ghana and it's less, and you are coming to Nigeria to process the same thing, it is high. What do? You look at outside and say, let me bring it in until we make it much more competitive in that area. That's when it will come. Then the question now is that it is already in the hand of government. I think government is the owner. They manage the natural resources, and that's part of the unbundling that we will also expect from government. For me, I would like to see a situation whereby you allow states to actually manage and bring percentage to the center. I think that would have enhanced more, because we've seen more states now trying to even open a company that will also operate in that. But if it is the other way around, those states will need more internal generated revenue. So they will do more, try to harness those things and bring a percentage to the center. I think that will have solved the problem.
Okay, that will do. Farouk, I want you to respond to on the gold. And another question is saying that what are the measures to employ in order to ensure that this growth is sustained?
Okay, thank you. On the gold issue, I think there's already an existing template or a structure that is being put up by the government in terms of how government can have, control over the gold mining and industry and whatnot. I think there's a statutory, fee in form of royalty that is meant to be paid for engaging in gold mining, and refining and whatnot. But the question is, what happens to the implementation? And we are talking of the informal sector. How many, illegal mining activities are taking place in Zamfara? How many are taking place here in Nasarawa, close to us? How are all of these captured in the government? So government is making a huge loss in terms of, harnessing the potentials attributed to gold as an important natural asset for the country. So the government can actually work towards the implementation of it, because we have already the existing template that would make us derive all the potentials as a government and as a nation. But the implementation is very poor. And the issue of insecurity also, has taken also over the mining industry, where miners are more concerned about their safety and whatnot. So these are things that are very sensitive and equally very important for the government to look at and to see how how we can harness the potentials in the gold mining aspect. This is another area that can attract a lot of foreign direct investment, create jobs, gives opportunities if that sector can be looked at very well. And on the issue of sustaining sustainability of our economic growth, this is a very pertinent and momentous question, I must say, because without which, Nigeria cannot enjoy, being an entity. Right. So what I feel, I would like to touch upon one or two macroeconomics fundamentals, as it was captured in one of the questions that has to do with exchange rates. Why is our exchange rate, why are we having, depreciation or devaluation and whatnot? So we have to look at it from that perspective so that we can, understand why and how we could navigate through. First of all, what brought about the sharp devaluation of our currency is due to the liberalization of the exchange rate. But this liberalization, even though it comes with a cost that we are paying, is good for the country. Just as we have been hailing the recalibration of the GDP as the right step in the right direction, I also align with the fact that the liberalization of the exchange rate also gives us a true depiction of, our exchange rate value, because prior to that we have been living on illusory, exchange rate template. It doesn't actually depict, the market value, the real value of our currency. So this is really a good step in the right direction, and we could see that there is some level of stability post the unification of the exchange rate. Right. It doesn't swindle up and down just as it was before. So at the heart of it, we cannot improve our exchange rate without, improving our productive capacity. We have to work on that seriously.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Farouk. As we begin to wind down this conversation, in just a minute, Prof, your final comments.
I really wanted to weigh in on this growth and sustainability because it's so important. Yes, yeah. See, for you to have sustainable growth, two things have to happen. One is that you have to diversify the economy. Number two, it has to be inclusive, because it is inclusivity that links it to poverty reduction, that links it to employment and all of that. And why is it so important? There are 90 million MSMEs in Africa. Nigeria has 42 million, 48% of entrepreneurs in Africa. Now, our population is 18% of Africa. Our GDP is 10% of Africa, 15% to 18% of Africa. But our entrepreneurship is 48%. That shows that entrepreneurship is a latent comparative advantage for Nigeria. Now, what does it mean to policy? If you really want to create employment, just say, what incentive can I give to 42 million businesses to employ one person each? That means automatically the next day you create 42 million jobs.
All right.
That's a policy decision. And then all you need is to say, look, we're spending money on training for jobs, doing that. Can I incentivize the employer to have one student or one person, train the person, employ the person, and transform?
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Let's get to Professor Mariam Abdu. Your final thoughts in a minute, too.
I think health, education, infrastructure, security is very key. Once we have that, we on the trajectory for more economic growth. Government should really look at industry. Industry needs to be addressed. Infrastructure needs to be addressed so that we can have a buoyant economic impact, and most especially women. As a woman, I feel women entrepreneurship is actually key. They should be encouraged more. Thank you.
Thank you. As a woman, I totally support you on that. In 30 seconds, your final thoughts. Yes.
Right. So for me, I think federal government need to do more. We are focusing more on fiscal and monetary policy more, while we are not working on our trade policy. I think we need to do more with our trade policy. That will help us and galvanize much more investment in Nigeria.
And probably align our fiscal and monetary policies.
Yes,
Align
they should work together.
And trade policy is very, very key too.
Okay,
all
Farouk,
right.
let's have your final thoughts too.
Well, at the heart of everything is policy reforms and seeing through to the implementation of it. So by this, I think we'll get to, the promised land if we maintain that.
All right.
Yes.
Farouk Abdullahi, financial analyst, we thank you very much for your perspectives on this conversation today. Thank you very much for coming.
It's always my pleasure.
All right. Let me also thank Dr. Ilyas Aliyu, who is an economist. We thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you for having me.
And from here in the studio, Professor Ken Ife, economic policy expert and president, Institute of Professional Economists and Policy Management. We thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
As always. All right. And finally, but by no means the least, Professor Mariam Abdu, Professor of Finance at the Kaduna State University. You joined us from our Kaduna studio via Zoom. Thank you very much for your time and your perspectives.
And that's Good Morning Nigeria for today. Tomorrow, another interesting topic will be up for discussion. I am Juma Yusuf. Have a great day.
And I'm Victor as well. See you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.